Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Jeff Abercrombie across the way. Jeff, NFL season concluding as we are recording this. Week 1 of the NFL season. Week 2 of the college football is in the books. So much to break down and talk about. How are you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well. We had a weekend away, so I'm actually playing catch up. But in the middle of it, I had some access to to some extra cable stations. So I got to watch a little bit more live than I do on the I usually do the cut up recaps on Sunday. So a lot of catch up, but a little bit of extra live games. And it kind of sounds like childhood bugs caught up to you there a little bit, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. We're dealing with a little bit of stuff going for the house here. My voice is a little scratchy, a little bit coughing going on. So hopefully we can make it through this episode without too much coughing on my end.
Yeah, well, we'll manage it so you make it all the way through the fourth quarter here, and I can drive us on. So why don't we just go right into it, and try and just maybe something a little bit new here, where instead of hitting all of the names, because we have so many good college performers these days, I'm just going to highlight in a quick hit section these players had notable games, and then we'll go into a couple of names that we've chosen to go into depth. So just starting right off the bat for the NFL Draft Report, we had really good performances this week from CJ Stroud, from the running backs, Sean Tucker, Mo Ibrahim, from Gray. He kind of took a lead role there. Corum took a little bit of a lead role there in Michigan. And Addison and Mims both had huge games. But why don't we go into some names that we want to talk a little bit further about? And let's just kick it off with our marquee matchup. So on the quarterback side, we had Bryce Young. We had the Alabama-Texas matchup. And Bryce Young struggled a little bit in that game. I mean, he took them back in the fourth quarter. But what did you see, Paul?
Yeah, so when I watched that game, it was you had the worst of Bryce Young, and then you had what makes him an intriguing high-level prospect towards the latter part of that game. When you watch Bryce Young play, first off, you're seeing a little bit of what Tua struggled with when he got to the NFL, and he wasn't playing with those all-world wide receivers. And I think the jury is still out on Tua in the NFL, and we'll see. Now he's got Jalen Waddle, he's got Tyreek Hill, so maybe it'll kind of settle it back into place, and we'll see more of the Tua from Alabama. But you watch Alabama right now, they don't have the receiver talent that they've had recently. They have good talent, and some of these guys are going to materialize and be round 1, round 2 guys. But they don't have the guys that were creating that instant separation where then Bryce Young could just be that distributor, that Magic Johnson, that point guard who just kind of feeds all his guys. And the physical limitations of Bryce Young were readily evident early in that game. His height being an issue, passes batted down, struggling to see things that were materializing, the arm talent being average or above average, not like great or very good. You saw him really, really struggle in that game. It was the worst I'd ever seen Alabama's offense in the Nick Saban era, its whole dynasty. They put it together. They made some good plays down the clutch. And Bryce Young showed that problem solving. When Dave Brugler was on a couple weeks ago, he talked about poise and his playmaking ability, not like Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray, but more of a guy who handles pressure well, is very poised, and solves problems. And you saw that down the stretch of that game. And I think people are going to be impressed with that. But there's also the physical limitations that if he doesn't have, I'm not sure at the next level, he's a elevator where he can carry a team on his back. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a game manager because I don't think that's true either. But I do think the way we see Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes basically be superhuman to make plays happen, that's not Bryce Young's game. And it's not going to be Bryce Young at the NFL level either. He's got to stay within the structure of what he can do. He can do things off structure and solve problems with creativity. That's his best trait. But there are limitations to that. He's not going to be for everybody. There's going to be old school people in the NFL that look at Bryce Young and say he's not for us. but he's got some Russell Wilson, he's got some Drew Brees in terms of sometimes how he plays in making things happen. But there were some issues that popped up in that game. Will be interesting to see if we see it pop up more throughout the season when he faces even better defenses than the Texas.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably not what anybody's really going to hear, because you're going to hear hype about Bryce Young and, you know, Heisman winning and willing to be, you know, the number one pick, etc. But, you know, Tua was in that boat himself at some level, right? And then we saw him get to the NFL, and I still think Tua is a very good quarterback, but like you said, there are some levels of limitations, and he can be a very good quarterback without being a transcendent level like a Josh Allen. And maybe that's what people are looking for. And we'll talk a little bit. Actually, why don't we just go into it? So we had another showdown on the slate, and we're going to just stick with the quarterbacks here. And we had Kentucky and Florida show off with Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. And I want to go a little bit more in depth with Richardson, because we talked a lot about him last week. You know, I hadn't gotten down into the nitty gritty of his tape, but, you know, we talked a little bit about the tools, and I wanted to actually give listeners, you know, a bit of a deeper insight into how he's playing right now and where I see it potentially going. But to touch on Will Levis really quickly, he's somebody, when you look at him, you'll see the classic NFL pocket passer quarterback. Like and it's really interesting because he and Anthony Richardson are stark opposites. Levis had very clean mechanics. He looked very precise with his actions, and he has just this amazing deep ball pinpoint accuracy. And it showed up in that game, on that long touchdown pass. Just, you know, that's what, you know, teams will fall in love with. So I do think we still can be talking about a scenario where Will Levis is drafted in the first round and maybe ahead of Anthony Richardson. But the trajectory that Richardson can go on, I think, is sky high. And we talked a little bit about it, but I want to give it more context. So I did a 2-game deep dive of these last 2 weeks. And, you know, I went in with this, with the hype and the highlights already setting high expectations, you know, as far as what his tools are. And I was still impressed. Like 5-star tools. We're talking, you know, the 5-tool athlete and baseball kind of thing. He, as a runner, I saw Cam Newton level athleticism, power, and he was elusive in the open field. His arm talent jumps off the screen. So just the velocity of his throws, he can throw them at a low trajectory on a line, on a dot to his receivers. And the spiral is just the prettiest ball, the tightest spiral that I've seen in a while. And, you know, I added into his tools, his just vicious pump fake. So we all know the highlight play, but even earlier that game, he had it was like Ben Roethlisberger when he was young, and he could just make an entire throwing motion, like he'd chuck it, but still hold on to the ball and not let it move even a little bit. So the rest of his profile, and that's what I've been saying, is a little bit high and low, right? So he's got inconsistent mechanics, and we see it on the misses on tape. You know, we've seen highlight plays, but when you look at his game tape, when you look at his stats at the end of it, there's a little bit of an efficiency issue, right? Because he's missing throws here, and he's had, you know, from his footwork and where he sets, and not squaring up to his throws, you know, he's had a few really bad misses. He's had a screen where he threw it behind the receiver for like a backwards lateral, and he threw it too far out in front of his other outlet pass, you know, leading him too far forward and having a missed pass right there. And he's bouncing kind of with his footwork. He's, you know, this was a problem with like Trey Lance a little bit, you know, bouncing behind the pocket with his footwork and then, you know, missing the throw low. So it's about learning these nuances, but when he has that dialed in, he's absolutely lethal. So when if he's able to just practice that more, clean it up, get it more consistent, he's at a level that could be the top overall pick of the NFL draft. And then just from a nuances perspective is how he plays the quarterback position. There's times he's dropping the eyes in the pocket where he's not patient enough and he's missing receivers getting open on the play concept, right? He's missing crossers, he's missing deep throws where he's not even making those throws. The receivers are coming open at the time, but he's already bailed on the play. And when he's had the time, and he's had a few really bad decisions. And I don't know if those come out as much as the highlight reels, but they were dropped interceptions too. So they don't show on the stat book. And unless you've kind of watched that play live, you didn't realize that it was there. But I mean, it was so egregious that if they're not cleaned up, I don't see him as a round one prospect because he's absolutely missing players that are, that are there undercutting his roots that he should see. And this isn't even the pick 6 that you all saw at the end of the game against Kentucky too. Like that one, I'm not sure if that's, the miscommunication with the receiver. There's a little bit more going on that play, but I mean, he still has to see that coming, right? And that was the other thing is he's staring down his receivers a little bit. He's not at a high level of manipulating defenders yet. So that's something where he could work on that a little bit more. But again, there's highs and lows here. I've seen him. You talked about how you saw him get through reads and progressions, and he's going left to right, right to left, going through at least to the third option, generating positive plays, big plays down the field, touchdown passes, going 1, 2, 3 touchdown pass to his running back. Right. So, and then on the, even on his highlight touchdown run that he had the 50-yarder, right, the previous week, you actually see him hold into the pocket, shuffle forward with a really good base, and just keep it open, ready to do the long pass to his receivers as they're streaking down the field and they're covered, but he's hanging with them through every possible window until that's gone. And then he takes off and runs and then he makes it happen. So that actually was, I thought, a really good play, first as a passer, then as a runner. So we're going to see a lot of ups and downs with him. I love the trajectory he's on. And I think the upside is worth the risk. We talked about, do you get him on a Devy squad? I mean, you really should take a swing here because, like I said, his upside, if he cleans things up, if he gets a little bit more consistent, is the top quarterback, the top overall pick of the draft. But he's not a lock. There is some risk there. And before we really go into this every single week with him, because I know it's just going to be tempting, I'm personally going to just let this play out a little bit, right? So growth, we got to be a little bit patient with. And so I'm going to give it a couple months and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to see how far has he gone. Let's get to the meaningful games when we're closing off for playoffs or a bowl game and see where he's at.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make lots of great points there. And, this wasn't a good statistical game. It was a poor statistical game. And, all the concerns that we talked about and things that he needs to improve and develop, they were on full display. But at the same time, I think you just said we gotta let time kind of evolve a little bit because everybody has their ups and downs. He didn't play much last year. For whatever reason, Dan Mullen chose not to play, even though this should have been his second year basically at the helm. And maybe some of these things that we're talking about would have been cleaned up, right? And it's going to take time. You go back and look at Josh Allen of Wyoming. He had plenty of ups and downs, good moments, bad moments. Trevor Lawrence, even after his amazing first year there, I remember talking to Matt about the struggles that Trevor Lawrence had early in his second year as the starter there, right? There's going to be these ups and downs, these ebbs and flows. And in this game in particular, one thing I do think is right now, he really feeds off of getting into a groove and a positive, and almost like a mindset.
His mechanics.
Yeah.
His mechanics, when they're solid, he's on he's unstoppable on a crazy hot streak. But when that lapse happens and it's kind of strung together, he has quarters where it's not there. But one thing, last week, we could maybe say it was an an amazing statistical highlight game. This week, we could say it was a very terrible statistical game. And what I'm seeing is I'm actually seeing his level of play in both of those games be up and down. But I was actually very encouraged with his game tape this week. This wasn't a wilt under pressure or, he just wasn't seeing it, and he just didn't have it this game. Like there was a lot to really take away from even this game tape on a bad game and say, I still see the potential of a round one quarterback.
Yeah, and to kind of close out on him, I also don't think the coaching did many great favors this particular week because that game was never really not in a competitive game that like they didn't really utilize his rushing ability. And I that's what I was kind of talking about. When he's going through some of those funks where it's bad, I feel like the coach has to understand that and utilize that athleticism and legs to kind of get him going again. Cause I feel like right now he kind of feeds off of that. Like he makes a big play with his legs and then things kind of settle down for him again. And maybe he gets back into the rhythm that he needs to. And they just really didn't run him much this past game. And I kept waiting for it. I watched that whole game in its entirety. I got to watch that one and the Alabama Texas start to finish. And I was surprised at the lack of design runs that they called for him, especially when he was struggling at times and the game was still very competitive and very much up for grabs. I think that's one of those things where a coach has to know his player and know that there's times there's going to be ups and downs and put him in a position kind of like last year, right? Justin Fields last year didn't even have a shot because they didn't even coach him to really have a shot last year. And I feel like this game, the coach kind of missed an opportunity a little bit right there. So we'll see. He's going to be fun to digest all year. But like you said, I don't think we know he has the raw traits. We know we need to see improvement in a variety of things. I don't think it's as simple as every week we're going to analyze and judge. Where is he 4 weeks from now? Where is he 6 weeks from now? Where is he 8 weeks from now? That'll, I think, will start to give us a little bit better of a picture on where we're talking about the trajectory for him in the NFL draft.
Yeah. And, he's got a long way to his NFL draft. So you mentioned that, the other game you watched in its entirety, and I'll tee it up for you again, is Texas, Alabama. And we had Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson. So not only, highlights of the, tons of pass catching weapons, but we had these just stellar running backs, maybe the 1-2 guys of the class. And one thing that was pretty standout was Gibbs was only 9 for 22 on the ground, but he had all the receiving work for Alabama, 9 for 74 and 1, and a big play at the end to help them get in field goal range. Bijan had tough sledding. It was Alabama, 21 rushes, 54 yards, a touchdown, but a big play through the air, 3 for 73 through the air. So when you looked at these guys, when you looked at Bijan against Alabama, when you looked at Gibbs and what he was able to do as the engine of the Alabama offense, what were you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of what we saw on film. I think Gibbs's calling card of what's going to make him a day 2 type NFL pick and a really productive player is he fits today's modern NFL to the T. Like I watched Jahmyr Gibbs the other day, and he was the best Alabama offensive player by far. And at times, Nick Saban, I actually think, should have been getting him the ball even more. I know he ended up having those 9 catches, so it looks like but there were stretches of that game where I was thinking to myself, why are they not getting Gibbs the ball more? He's their best offensive player by far. He has a lot of Austin Eckler is the guy I kind of comp him to. If somebody wants to say Alvin Kamara, like that's the world where he's going to live in. That's the world where he's going to translate to the NFL level. I think he's more Eckler than Kamara when I watch him play. If I'm gonna put a name in the NFL, but he's a guy that the versatility that he's gonna bring, but more nuance as a runner, a better frame than guys like A-Chain or even a guy like James Cook last year, guys that I'm huge fans of, and anyone who listens to the show knows that. Gibbs has that elite receiving profile, but he's also got more nuance and understanding of the run game, running concepts, patience, vision, stuff like that. So to me, his trajectory is only going to keep going higher and higher with Alabama Bijan, I think we saw he's still playing me on a pretty poor offensive line. I liked some times where he was hit the hole and just get what I can get. And I think he understood against Alabama. He couldn't dilly-dally. He couldn't try to make a big play out of nothing. And I know the stats aren't good, but there were times where I think he showed me I'm just going to run and get what I can get, and I'm going to use my power here. And it might only be 3 yards, but that's better than a 4-yard loss of trying to do too much. And then you saw the receiving capabilities. He's got that in his arsenal that he can run wide receiver routes at times. Like, the big play that they line them up on the outside, you saw body control, you saw ball skills. Like, Bijan offers that capability. So I think these guys, even though the stats, especially the run stats, were nothing to write home about, when I watch these guys play in this big game with defenses dominating for the most part, they still checked off the boxes to me as guys who are going to be high-level prospects, round 1, round 2 guys, top 5 running backs. And I think we saw what these guys bring to the table. And I think even in games where their run production wasn't good, they still showed why they're so versatile and impactful, because they can impact the game in another way, even if their run game isn't working.
Yeah, and honestly, for Bijan, I've never really worried about him as an open field runner. It's always been, what can he do from, a nuance of the running back position. And these are the type of games that I highlight, and I want to go back and actually look at the blocking scheme, look at how the defense is lined up, look at the post snap, look at what the, running back's looking at the handoff. What is his decision-making thought process, and actually go in and dissect him at the end. And it sounds like, just from your watch through that, there's possibly some growth for me to see here, from Bijan's perspective, which makes me extremely excited. Let me just go through a couple other, really big statistical weeks. Raheem Sanders, we touched on him real briefly last week. 24, 156, and 2 this week. Deuce Vaughn, we forgot to talk about him last week. 18, 126, and 1. This week he's coming in with 24 rushes, 145 yards, 2 touchdowns. So you're seeing a lot of workload for a little guy. I'm not really sure, again, not watching the Kansas State games, so how that's coming, where it's coming from, but they're scheming him the ball. They're getting him the ball, and he's delivering. One of my notes on him was, even in traffic, he's a little guy, but he knows how to dance between bodies, within the traffic, and still make the most of things. So I'll be excited to dig into him later this year when we highlight him a little bit more. But one name I really wanted to touch on before I pass it back on to you is Tank Bigsby. 13 for 51 and 1. Last week was, 16 touches, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns. And what I really wanted to highlight with Tank Bigsby is that he looks like freshman year Tank Bigsby. It looks like a lot of what was going wrong, not just with him, but Auburn in general, at least when it comes down to Tank and how he plays and how he's able to evade defenders, manipulate defenders, take advantage of creases or open space, use his athleticism. It all looks back. And I just wanted to harken back and say 2 years ago, when we were looking at freshman Bijan and freshman Tank Bigsby, these guys were the cream of the crop, the top of the class, 1A, 1B. And Tank Bigsby looks like he did his freshman year. So that should just really put him high on your radar. One final name for us to touch, and if you want to touch back on any of those names, but I know you also want to touch on Troy Dye out of USC taking on the lead role there as the running back. 14 touches, 105 yards, 1 touchdown. Why don't you go ahead and dig in there?
Yeah, so Travis Dye, we talked about him last week, and we also said that, like, we didn't know how that situation was going to play out, right? A lot of guys last week got touches in that USC backfield, and this week against Stanford, he kind of emerged, right? 14 rushes. And I think in that scheme, the way they're going to spread it out, the way they're going to have those great receivers, Dye complements that as like that space back, a guy who you could stretch the field out 3, 4, 5 wide, at times, and then like he can either line up as like a receiver in that 5 wide set. He can motion back in to be the running back. So to me, I think we're gonna see a lot of big games from him, and he's not going to be a guy who profiles as a guy who's going to be a 18 touch player even at the next level. But I think if we're going to see him, I think most weeks settle in that like 12 to 14 touches, even maybe in college. And I think that might be his role he's eventually ticketed to, at the NFL level. I like the combination of receiver and, runner that he kind of brings to the table. Guys like that intrigue me. There was a reason why last year, I liked Rashad White and I liked Tyler Beatty and, guys like that, who have that ability to impact the game in a variety of ways. I don't think he's a guy who's going to be power gap, but he's a guy who can run outside zone. He can be used on the perimeter. So I like that Dye kind of emerged this week. I think when the dust kind of settles, he's going to be the receiver that's most impactful for the Trojans this year in that high flying offense. I saw something the other day. A lot of people think they're going to be significantly favored in every game the rest of the year. So USC could be on a trajectory of an undefeated season in the playoff. We're going to get to see a lot of opportunity of Travis Dye, I think, during the home stretch of the season, because I think USC might be one of the last teams standing in terms of, going to the playoffs and having a real shot for us to see them against, some SEC teams and stuff like that. So I think it's going to kind of be a fun watch for Dye this year.
Yeah, it'd be great to see them against the SEC teams, right? And in the past, we've sort of been deprived of that because, sometime down the line in the program did get a Pac-12 upset, right? And that's just kind of what you get on the West Coast. And I think, now with Lincoln Riley there and just the way that program is really trying to ratchet it up a notch, that's what it looks like, at least, with the way that they're just loaded on talent across the board on offense. Why don't we switch it over to the wide receivers since we're running through on time here? Because I know that there's, we highlighted a couple big names that had big games, but I think we want to do a little spotlight on maybe some players who are struggling a little bit. So starting maybe just with Quinton Johnson, 2 for 22. He had a quiet game last week too. This week, the competition was light and TCU scored a lot of points and he just wasn't part of the party. Another name too, Jermaine Burton. You mentioned Alabama doesn't have any pass catchers right now. Burton's a guy I loved coming in just based on a really limited sample size, but I highlighted, I love the way he attacks DBs and attacks leverage. And I thought he got open 2 for 10. And from what it sounds like he wasn't, playing at the same level of what his promise was. So Paul, why don't, again, back to that Alabama-Texas game, is there any, as you're watching Burton, is there anything you can shed some more light on?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard without like the all 22 film, but just from watching the TV coverage, he looked like Texas is not loaded with DBs in terms of like, they've had 3 first round prospects and like in a matter of years. I forget, they had the stat up the other day. It's like it's been staggering. So while Texas is in the midst of hopefully turning around because they're good for college football when they're a great team, they're not this loaded defense. And like I said earlier with Bryce Young, their receivers weren't getting open. And Tyler Harrell, the speedster from Louisville, hasn't really played yet for them due to an injury. They need his speed because Burton and the rest of those guys, Ja'Cory Brooks, like guys that are good players. I just was surprised at how little impact Burton had on that game because I really liked him on film in the Georgia film. And then he scores a couple touchdowns week 1, but week 1 Alabama was basically, versus a low level opponent. So like you couldn't read much from that. And then here it is against Texas, an opportunity. Now listen, Bryce Young didn't have a lot of time, but or even when he had time, Burton was struggling to create that separation. Going back to what I said, like Bryce Young last year had guys that created instant separation. Right now, not that anyone thought that was Burton's calling card, but I still am surprised that he struggled as much in this game. And I want to see now, like, more. I expect more out of him. I have higher expectations for him. I think the people who are fans of him have higher expectations. It's one game. The wide receivers in general have gotten off to a very slow start. This 2023 wide receiver class through week 0, week 1, and week 2, it has been relatively quiet, right? Jermaine Burton didn't perform this week. Quinton Johnston didn't have anything going in this game 2 weeks in a row now. A guy who some people think could challenge Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quinshon Boutte as the top wide receiver. We haven't seen anything from him yet, and that doesn't mean anything because NFL teams, and I'm at the forefront. I don't really think college statistics are too much of a predicator of NFL success. Personally, it's more, especially the NFL teams, its traits, its characteristics, and stuff like that. But I'm surprised, as the focal point of that TCU offense, we haven't seen Johnston live up to what we expected yet. He could instantly turn it on, but he's gotten off to a slow start. Burton in this Texas game underwhelmed. Josh Downs has missed 2 games due to injury. Smith-Njigba's hurt. Quinshon Boutte barely making an impact on their games. Very slow start. I'll bring him up here. Gary Bryant out of USC looks like he's the clear, third man there, or even fourth man at times. So I think his draft pedigree is going to take a big hit, whether he's got to wait it out for a year or transfer at the end of the year. The one name right now that's exploding is Jordan Addison. Not a surprise. He's a very refined player. He fit that offense perfectly. He's been the one receiver. And you mentioned it before, Marvin Mims had a great game this week as well. But it's been a slow start for the wide receivers. And Burton and Johnston are 2 of the names at that. And Boutte, obviously, another one. And Gary Bryant, I'm not sure there's enough to go around there to bring the best out of Gary Bryant when you already have Addison and then, the underclassman phenom Mario Williams.
Yeah, and you can only use TCU as an excuse for so long for why Quentin Johnson isn't, shining. I mean, that was an excuse a bit last year. He flashed, and you watch his tape, and you're like, well, he's a good player, and you might still get there. But we thought that about Jalen Reagor, right? Boutte too. Boutte. He shows up a little bit more this week. You said if you were Kelly, you were going to come out and just scheme him looks. I mean, 5 catches, 42 yards. I don't know that he's. I don't know that we're seeing the dominant player that Boutte, is right now, and that's something that we need to watch as the season goes on. Why don't we just go ahead and Michael Mayer had a 100-yard game and a touchdown. We'll have some chances to talk about them. There's not too many tight ends that we're going to get distracted on through the year. So why don't we, running a little bit long, take this straight to the Devy Slant, and just my quick hits: Caleb Williams, Travion Henderson, both Ohio State wide receivers, Egbuka and Harrison, both had big games. The other one I had here was Worthy, but I know you want to talk about him a little bit more. So I had him on my quick hits, 100 yards against Bama. But why don't you go a little bit into depth that to highlight him a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I know people are going to be worried long term about the frame, but I think it was Gus Johnson broadcasting that game, and he mentioned the name. And listen, the underclassmen guys, we haven't done deep dives on them, so usually I don't have player comps for the underclassmen. But as soon as Gus Johnson said it, and then watching him that whole game, the speed, the releases, the package that he provides, he's basically, in my opinion, on the trajectory of being Hollywood Brown 2.0. That's who he reminds. That's who. I didn't think of it. Like I said, Gus Johnson thought of it, but then watching him that whole game, it's so obvious. It's the natural comparison that when draft time eventually rolls around for Xavier Worthy down the line, that's going to be the guy I think you see and hear him comp to a lot. And his acceleration and his speed, it's instant. It's something that it's disappointing that Quinn Ewers is going to be out for a while, because I really do think the Texas offense could have really hit their stride as he got more comfortable under center and with Bijan and Worthy. it was going to be fun to see that. And, and then we'll see down the line if Ewers is the quarterback there for the long haul, if another Manning is headed there, another Manning in the long lineage of Mannings. Right now Texas is the pick for him, but I think Xavier Worthy is going to be a guy that he's going to be one of those guys that is compared to Hollywood Brown, that vertical slot player who just explosive. So I hadn't watched a lot of him. I just knew, I seen him in bits and pieces, but what he was able to do in terms of, there were other plays that the quarterback just blew, that he blew right by Alabama defensive backs. Like, Alabama didn't have answers for Xavier Worthy. And if their quarterback could have taken advantage of it, Texas comes away with that upset for sure. So I thought it was a really impressive performance for Worthy, because just like Bill Belichick sets out to take out the best player on the other team in the passing game, I'm sure Saban was targeting limiting Xavier Worthy's impact on that game, and he couldn't. Worthy was having his way, even against the game plan, probably game planned around him.
Yeah, him or maybe Bijan too, though, right?
Well, yeah, Bijan for sure. But in terms of the passing game, like who they didn't want him, like, beat him deep and stuff like that. Like, I was surprised at how much he was beating them vertically, when I'm sure that was a point of emphasis, in Alabama's game plan. But I just don't think they can keep up with him.
Yeah. So, I mean, he is a player that I think we have to really watch as potentially the top wide receiver coming out for his class. Again, frame definitely adds to a different element of prospects when you're weighting them out, and who could be sort of that true outside threat versus the dynamism that can come from players like Worthy. I'm going to skip Will Shipley. He had a good game. He had 2 touchdowns, but I want to do a little Devy highlight before we move on to the NFL side of things, and just put a couple names out there. One, you've probably heard Nick Singleton. I mean, he was, I think, the top graded running back out of his class, freshman this year, 10 rushes, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, 6'0", 218 pounds already. So great frame, great size. And I mean, he hit the ground running. It's what we saw Braylon Allen do last year. This is great sign of things to come. Another name that may be going under the radar just because he's playing behind Zach Evans, but Quinshon Judkins is a freshman at Mississippi, 5'11", 220. And again, just 10 rushes, 104 yards. And, he's got those Devy people. He's got their eyes popping a little bit right now. So that's just a big name to watch for the Devy radar. And we go into deeper dives, later on. These guys are freshmen, so we've got a little bit of patience here. Let's move on. NFL rookie report. So again, just quick hits. Really good games. Jahan Dotson, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave. They're all starting to be a little bit of a piece of the offense as rookies. Nothing major. We're not talking Justin Jefferson, OBJ, but they're getting 5-6 catches, 50-60 yards. Dotson with 2 touchdowns was really nice to see. Players that didn't stand out. Some people had some hype too. George Pickens, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Sky Moore, Alec Pierce dropped a touchdown. Watson dropped a touchdown. They're taking a little bit of a rougher road. That's not always, a concern when it comes to rookies. They've got to make their way through development. But we have a few running backs that I think we should highlight. Again, some derailed hype trains with James Cook, 1 touch, -2 yards, and a fumble lost, and then we just didn't see him again. Dameon Pierce, 11 carries, 33 yards, out-snapped, out-touched by Rex Burkhead. These hype trains kind of went derailed. Is there anything that you're panicking on, Paul?
Well, I think the Dameon Pierce thing is a good example of and listen, I think Dameon Pierce is going to lead that backfield in touches, but by the time the year's over. But I do think sometimes the preseason has become more watered down than ever. Like, there are teams that now punt every game, like no players of relevancy play. And I do think Dameon Pierce was going up against a lot of backups. And, I bit into it. And that goes against a lot of things I believe in terms of I don't trust fourth round running backs. I stay far away from him in Dynasty. Like, we had this conversation last year, Michael Carter, who kind of is the reason why another guy that we could talk about, didn't look as good because Michael Carter did look so good. So I still think in Dynasty, I'd be a little concerned about Dameon Pierce already, only because, it's Rex Burkhead who got like 20 something touches in a neutral game script, in a game script that they were leading, in a game script that they weren't playing from behind. Houston's probably going to be in game scripts that are far worse than that most of the season. And who's going to be in there when they're on more passing situations? It's going to be Rex Burkhead. So I do think there's some level of concern for Dameon Pierce, because I did think we already expected him to seize that opportunity. And we thought, worst case scenario, he's the early down runner. He's getting most of the rushing carries. And worst case scenario, like it's a watered down, like Nick Chubb usage in Cleveland. Like he's going to be the guy, early down runner, goal line runner. Yeah, he's going to come off the field and not be the pass catcher probably, but we're going to get everything else with him. The fact that he lost out on so many early down rushes and lost out on positive game script touches to Rex Burkhead, I think is a little concerning. The James Cook one, I'm not panicking at all, because honestly, I didn't expect him. The tea leaves were kind of on the wall that they were going to start the season with a real running back timeshare. We had heard in the summer that they were going to give Zach Moss another opportunity. I went on the Harris Football Podcast and said, listen, I think James Cook's a guy you're going to want to get the second half of the year and buy him for next year more than this year. And the truth of the matter is, Zach Moss still looked like Zach Moss. Slow, unathletic, and not really bringing anything to the table. They're not going to continue to give Zach Moss 11 or 12 touches a game. Those touches are eventually going to work their way to James Cook. I have little doubt in my mind. The fumble, we've seen guys in their rookie games fumble, hit the sideline. That's some coaches are like that. Others, I'll let them work through it. Buffalo has such a great team. I guess they don't really have to let their guy work through it, and they didn't need a lot from him. So I'm not panicking on James Cook. I think by the middle of the year, we'll start to see him be very much integrated in that offense. Pierce, I'd be a little concerned, but I still think he's going to lead the backfield in touches. Just surprised on how much he lost out to Rex Burkhead based on the game script and the type of work in terms of early downs that Rex was being utilized over him in.
Yeah, for Pierce, I am worried, mostly just because I think people thought he was going to take on the role. And that's what you had to be useful for the Houston Texans was the guy who kind of just got it all because he was better than everyone else. And it's not to say that Pierce, isn't a good prospect and a good player and has a potential good NFL career in front of him. But, Rex Burkhead is a professional. They want the passing down protection and the passing routes and be where he needs to be and hit the holes he's supposed to hit. So I think even if Pierce starts to pick it up and even take the majority, I just think there's enough of a shared workload there that you're probably not comfortable with him, in your fantasy lineups. And beyond that, we've seen with Michael Carter, fourth round rookie pick gets drafted over, gets a Breece Hall drafted ahead of him, and we have a really good class next year. So yeah, you hit it with James Cook and Zach Moss, and I think those touches will flip. So why don't we just go to Breece Hall real quick? 6 for 23 on the ground, 10 targets, 6 catches, 38 yards. Michael Carter was their first option, but it was a pretty even split. And the passing work is, I think, very encouraging sign if you're waiting for Breece Hall in an opening for him to really prove what he's gotten as a playmaker.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about the pass stuff. I don't think we see the Jets throw 59 times again any game this season. So I think the passing numbers even like the Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, like their numbers were all inflated today with 59 pass attempts. And the running backs, we have yet to see Zach Wilson be comfortable doing that in terms of checking it down like that too, right? Joe Flacco, we know is going to be good at that. But I do think what we saw out of Breece Hall, while it was nice to see him as involved in the passing game, Michael Carter's not going away this year. And I thought it was going to be more of a 65-35 this year. And maybe by the end of the year, it even split more like a 70-30. I think now, best case scenario for Breece Hall people is right now it was 60-40 Michael Carter. Can we get to a point at ever in this year where it's 60-40 Breece Hall? I think now that's the question. Michael Carter's a good back, right? Like we talked about him a lot last year. I wasn't willing to buy him in Dynasty because of that fourth round draft capital. But Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl director, said there was a lot of, there was an injury that was kind of unknown to the public. And that's why he fell out of day 2. So it wasn't like Michael Carter wasn't a day 2 running back talent. And they added another day 2 running back talent. And I do think it'll eventually skew towards Breece Hall, but there's a reason that I think you were with me on this take. I know other people were. Kenneth Walker was a better natural runner than Breece Hall. Mm-hmm. Breece Hall had bigger plays. He was a better receiver. There was more versatility to his game in college, but Breece Hall wasn't the best in terms of vision, patience, natural run instincts compared to Kenneth Walker.
Well, to say he wasn't as good of a runner as Kenneth Walker, though, is like Kenneth Walker was an exceptional runner, though.
Yes.
And I do think we'll eventually get to like a 60-40 split back the other way. And you're right, you're not going to get all the passing game usage, but even if you scale it back 20%, that's still 6 to 7 targets, which is encouraging. I do think you have a great point, though. Zach Wilson has not utilized the running backs, and that could be a major anchor for both players. And San Francisco run scheme, that's what they're carrying over, right? These guys came from San Francisco, and they find roles for these players, right? They're not going to necessarily commit to one guy. And that could also just be a thorn in the side for both of them for a couple years even. I still think Breece Hall is a very talented player. I'm not so scared that I'm running off of him, but I think those concerns that you've brought up are very legitimate.
Yeah, and I think what week 1 has showed us across the board is I'm not sure we're going to have any fantasy superstars from the rookie class in year 1. Like I don't think we're going to have usable players for sure. Breece Hall might very much be an RB2 by the end of the year. He's probably already a flex. And I think we're going to have other guys like that. And even some of the receivers who had good opening weeks, right? I'm not sure we're going to have, I don't even want to say Justin Jefferson or Ja'Marr Chase because those are extreme outliers. But I just don't think we're going to have guys, even Drake London. I think
Devontae Smith, kind of, 1,000 yards about.
Yeah, like Drake London. I think Drake London could do that. But that's in today's NFL with how many good receivers there are. That's not even a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, probably. That's probably a wide receiver 3. I think
that's great for a rookie, though. That's great.
It's absolutely great. I'm just saying, like, I don't think we're going to have the redraft superstar rookie this year that impacts fantasy on a grandiose level. They're going to be guys that are starters. They're going to be guys that you want to get on your dynasty team. They're going to be guys that the trajectory could eventually be star fantasy players. But I don't think there's anybody in the perfect scenario set up right now who we're just going to see them. Gary Wilson, really good player, questionable quarterback there in New York. Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. Drake London, a very suspect offense. I don't think you're going to see I think you're going to see a good statistical year, not a monster statistical year. Jahan Dotson, I know he had 2 touchdowns this week, and I love him as a player, but you started to return to Curtis Samuel being a thing.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin's there. So I think you're going to see a good season at Jahan Dotson. I don't think you're going to see a star-studded, season. And I think that kind of goes down the line. The running backs. When does Kenneth Walker get back? Breece Hall is going to have a Michael Carter problem for a big chunk of the year. Like, that's not going away, I think. Sky Moore, Justin Watson got hurt, so he'll move up to number 4. Can he eventually overtake Mecole Hardman? I know a lot of people in the fantasy community think that. I've been suspect that might take longer than some people want to believe. George Pickens was the hot name all summer, in terms of that, but they still have Deontay Johnson. Mitchell Trubisky is Mitchell Trubisky. They have Claypool there still, so who knows? Michael Thomas looks back, 2 touchdowns yesterday. Olave's, Jarvis Landry looked really good in his first game in New Orleans. So I don't think any receivers are set up for like an explosion this year. I think you're going to see some solid, good performances. Maybe we get to a point where we have some wide receiver breeze. Maybe Breece Hall eventually materializes into an RB2. The rest of the guys, Dameon Pierce was drafted by the end of draft season as a guy who people were penciling in as an RB2. That's got to be a wait and see now. And James Cook got to be stashed on your bench. Unplayable until we see at least him getting those 10 to 11 touches or 9 to 10 touches.
Zach Moss was a healthy scratch last year, right? When that happens, James Cook, that's what you got to look for. Yeah, I think there's one missing name, and we'll get to him, but maybe just a quick hit on the guys you said were usable versus the guys we said were waiting. We had 2 tiers of wide receivers, right? You had Jamison Williams, Olave, Wilson, London. And you had the second tier of wide receivers, the Sky Moores, the Christian Watsons, the Pickens, and then people put Jahan Dotson, drafted behind a lot of those guys sometimes. Yep. And that's not how we had it. And we had, we saw Jahan Dotson as a first-round pick. And I think with his game, what he's shown is he's elevated with that top tier, and he's not in the same group as those second-round picks. But the name that we're missing here is Treylon Burks, right? He had 3 catches, 5 targets, 55 yards. One of the most interesting things here is that he had a low snaps share. He had, 50, 60% of snaps. He was a package player. And yet he still managed to be able to find some production on the level of his peers. So I think that what that means is there's room to grow here as he integrates more into the offense, as he becomes a full-time player. He can maybe have that high ceiling that we were looking for as sort of that AJ Brown replacement. The only thing that's kind of getting in the way, maybe, is Kyle Phillips. Kyle Phillips had some little draft loves as a day 3 guy, 9 targets, led the team, 6 catches, 66 yards. Let's hit Treylon Burks. We do kind of know where you stand on him, and I think that you're optimistic. Maybe the other question for you here is can Kyle Phillips be that Hunter Renfrow level guy that comes out of this draft class?
Yeah, you just said it. That was the guy I was going to bring up. I watched this game start to finish because they were facing the Giants this week, so it wasn't bouncing around during a Giants game. So I watched these 2 players very closely. Treylon Burks, package player for now. He's going to take the outside job from Nick Westbrook-Ikini. I think where the interesting part is, though, I think right now Treylon Burks would be at his best if he was playing a big slot type role early on in his career. But Kyle Phillips is going to make that really hard. Ryan Tannehill already has complete confidence and trust in Kyle Phillips. You saw it on some of the passes he was willing to throw to him. You saw the big play that set him up for what many thought would be the game-winning field goal before Bullock missed it. Kyle Phillips is going to be that guy that he had his fans who thought great route runner, a guy who could instantly become a starting slot. I think he's going to be that slot. And it was just one game coming off a major injury, but Robert Woods didn't look like the Robert Woods that we know. I think he'll be okay. But I think Kyle Phillips has a chance to be a guy right off the bat this year, catch 60, 65 passes. And I'm not sure a lot of people were predicting that. And I do think Treylon Burks, all the summer stuff, that seems to be out the window already. In this offense, the amount of times they're going to be able to get him on quick hits and slants and then utilize his after the catch ability, I think the way they run their offense through Derrick Henry is going to open up those play action quick hitters to Treylon Burks and let him, like you talked about, room to grow. I think he'll be a full-time player by week 4 or 5. And by that, he'll be the starter in 2 wide sets. I think
whether that's play action and he's sneaking on a slant behind the or crosser over behind the linebackers as they get sucked up, inevitably trying to hit Henry, or those RPOs, right, as an extension of the run game almost. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the one issue they have though, their receivers don't really. Their receivers, they're missing something. Robert Woods is. See, I feel like my one concern about Treylon Burks is, are they going to put him in a position to ask him to do things that he's not really best at? Like they had him running some like go routes and stuff yesterday. Like that's not his game. Like, but they don't really have a true X on their team right now. That's not Robert Woods' game. Robert Woods has never been that. Robert Woods is like the prototypical, Z kick inside, back and forth from between the slot and the Z guy. They don't really have that prototype. They don't have a burner. They have no speed in terms of like straight line speed at all in terms of their wide receiver group. So I do fear that they're going to ask him to maybe do something that he's not ready to do and just play on the outside exclusively because of how good Kyle Phillips has looked. And they're going to ask him to run those vertical routes. That's not really Treylon Burks' game right now. Now, if he starts showing that, well, then we're really cooking, because we've seen that before,
right? Justin Jefferson was only a slot player. AJ Brown was only a slot player, right?
Yep.
It's very hard to project this sometimes. I think my one final wrap up before we hit the dynasty report, as we're nearing an hour here, but I think that Kyle Phillips window, it sounds like you're a buyer, and I think it's still open. And so that's something where, that's probably one thing to maybe put some feelers out there, because it seems like he's going to be a usable flex player for you. Maybe, with Ryan Tannehill for a couple of years here. Let's go straight to the dynasty, the stock report. We're going to skip the quick hits and probably have a couple names here, because week 1 typically has some pretty big shifts. And just starting at the quarterback, I know you want to hit Jalen Hurts. He's stock up for you. Why is he stock up for you?
Yeah, I've been very reluctant. I always loved Jalen Hurts, the player, gritty, tough, but I was always very reluctant last year, if you listen to this show, because I didn't think Philly was all in on Jalen Hurts. And I still am not sold that they are. If they, if he comes up, poorly in a big playoff game or whatever, I could still see them saying our window is now. If they went hard for Russell Wilson, that he didn't want to go there. They were in on Deshaun Watson once upon a time. So I'm not sure they're sold on Jalen Hurts. But what I've come to realize, and why I'm going to be moving up my dynasty ranks, is he has shown enough that even if he's not the starting quarterback of the Eagles, they're going to be able to flip him if they want to choose a different path. They'd be able to flip him and get like a high second round pick, if not a first round pick, for Jalen Hurts. There's enough poor quarterbacks floating around the league that Jalen Hurts has showed enough in a short amount of time, and you combine it with the athleticism and how all the positive things you hear about him in terms of his character and work ethic, that I think it's not, if he doesn't make it in Philadelphia as a big star, he's going to be a backup quarterback. I think unless the wheels just fall off this season, I think he could be good but not great, and the Eagles still try to upgrade. I still think he'd end up being traded then for decent compensation and be a quarterback somewhere else. So I don't think he's going away in the next short window. And then you combine the athleticism, the rushing ability. That part of his game is right up there with the guys that we love in terms of the dual threat. He's great by the red zone. He's showing improvement in his passing acumen. So I think it just has to be stock up. As much as I don't want to see the Eagles be good as a Giants fan, I think the Eagles are going to be a dangerous team. Like if somebody made me pick right now, I think they're a legitimate contender, like real legitimate contender in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean the NFC East looks. I mean, congrats on the win for the Giants, but
they're gonna
the
walk.
Cowboys,
they're gonna walk away with the NFC East. They're
the
gonna
Dak's
win that
injury.
division.
Although we don't have to mention it too much, but that's makes it a lot less competitive. It does. I'm with you. And honestly, it's actually really refreshing to see an organization with a little bit of patience and letting a guy build up his talents and doing it in a really smart way. It's kind of what we saw with Lamar in Baltimore, and I do think it's not that Jalen Hurts wasn't the passing prospect that Lamar was, but that doesn't mean he can't develop that, and I think he is, and I think that is stock up, and I was too low on him, and I do think he has to be. I mean, I would take him over any one of the 2021 rookie QBs at this point. Over Lawrence, even over Trey Lance, and I'm a huge Trey Lance fan. So that's
the move. Yeah, and that's the perfect scenario. I've been reluctant to put him over those guys, thinking that they had longer staying power. I'm not sure anymore.
Not anymore.
I'm like, because let's be honest, and we'll save this for another day because I don't want to knock them off of one game in a monsoon for parts of that game. But are we sure if the things go off the rails in San Francisco? Are we sure Trey Lance even gets this whole year? And if he doesn't get this whole year, then we can't commit to him in fantasy and think he's a guaranteed top 12 quarterback. And I've been reluctant to put Jalen Hurts over those guys that we know very little about except projecting. I think we're starting to know at least what Jalen Hurts is, and he's still got an arrow that's pointed up. Who knows how high it can go? While the other guys, we're waiting to even see if they can make it as solid NFL starters. It's just got to be Hurts above all of those guys. He's got to go up in that next tier after the Burrow and Herbert tier. He'll fall in right there for me. I think
I'll have to. I love that debate with Lance too, and I will rank Hurts above him, but that's a great one for another day. I really want to hit. We have Saquon Barkley as a big stock riser, so we have to hit that. And I'm just going to pair him with a pretty big stock faller here, Cam Akers, major stock down. I don't know. Do you want first crack at this, Paul?
Sure. I mean, listen, I went out on a limb in all my redraft leagues this year. I had Saquon Barkley as my 5th overall running back after the big 4. And I picked him in the first round. I took him as high as 8th in one draft. Like, I was all in on Saquon Barkley. Week 1, if it proved anything, I think if most redraft leagues could have a new draft tonight, I think he's arguably the 4th running back, maybe even the 3rd running back taken, because this is the guy who, if he's healthy, could be the best running back in football. I said it. I think he's going to be a top 5 pick in fantasy next year. I don't know if he's going to be on the Giants next year. That is going to be a who knows scenario. I think he's going to put the Giants in, using a baseball reference, basically forcing the Giants' hand, very similar to what Aaron Judge is doing for the Yankees in his walk year. I think he's going to put them in a no-win situation of either have to commit to a running back, big money, or let him walk out the door off of a 2,000-yard season in terms of total yards. The speed, the explosion is back. We saw him put his head down and run with more power than I've ever seen him in his entire NFL career. Dable's going to feature him. So huge stock up on him. Cam Akers, I don't know if it's the injury. I don't know if it's doghouse, but massive stock down on him. I do think he's going to work his way back up, but a guy who we thought was on the trajectory of being like an RB1, RB2 before the injury. And then we said, okay, maybe he can get back. Now it's a little bit of an unknown in terms of what we saw in terms of his usage opening night.
Yeah, Notebook subscribers will see my unwavering belief in Saquon Barkley, who's always been, in my top, 3-4 dynasty running backs, just because I believe in the talent. I believe in that explosiveness. You're right. The situation's interesting, but he'll find a home. Could you imagine Saquon in the Shanahan scheme? Goodness gracious. I think Akers is a really interesting conversation because, Saquon Barkley, it's obvious. You should have bought into him. If you didn't buy into him, you missed your boat. If you did, you just got massive value. And he carried my fantasy teams last weekend. So Cam Akers, I had a good discussion on Twitter where there's a lot of talk about potentially buying low on Cam Akers. You send a second because the prospect that you draft with a second round draft pick isn't going to be the same profile that Cam Akers was. And I don't know that I could do that, mostly because what is the best case scenario for Cam Akers when you look at this season or sort of the short-term future? I mean, they were already before doghouse and everything going into camp, even before they were both hurt. And it was a 50-50 split with Henderson and Akers. And I think even if Akers works his way back, that's what he's working his way back to, is a split backfield with Darrell Henderson. He'd have to outshine Henderson. And honestly, I don't think we've seen that ever happen. At Henderson at his best, I don't think we've ever seen Cam Akers play as good as Henderson at his best. So, and then, maybe they let Henderson walk after this year, but is it only going to be Cam Akers? Is it going to be like a Rashad Penny situation? Or like Rashad Penny, are they going to invest in another back? And I think they'd have to. So there's not a situation where I see Cam Akers. The only way he's returned value is when he's had a massive workload. And I just don't see a path for that happening to him anymore. And so I don't think I can shell out a buy low for Cam Akers. He already was a little bit down in my ranks, and I don't know if I'll be able to dock him any lower because this is kind of what I was projecting, but it scares me.
Yeah, I think you're justified in saying that. We've seen guys come back from, the torn Achilles quicker than ever, but a lot of guys, it takes years. So like everybody's different in terms of that. I love Cam Akers, the player coming out of Florida State, so if he could get back to that guy, then yeah, I'd be interested. But as you said, I'm not sure he's far enough into his NFL career now. Draft capital doesn't matter. If they don't think he could be the best at this point, he wasn't a first round pick. He wasn't top 5. He was a day 2 pick. Teams draft day 2 running backs and they never materialize into being great players. Some make it, some don't. Like, I don't think that matters anymore. Now is he healthy enough? Can he play?
I'll do one more quick hit on the running back because you mentioned the Achilles. Otherwise I was going to skip him. But the only reason I didn't buy into more James Robinson this year, this offseason, was because of that Achilles. And goodness, he looked like vintage James Robinson. And maybe it's because his game wasn't relied on athleticism, but I feel maybe it was right process to not buy into a guy coming off the Achilles injury, but I feel bad about not doing it. I'm going to jump over to the wide receivers because we'll have more time to talk about them later. Just some major stock up. AJ Brown, stock up, 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 up. Michael Pittman, stock up for me. CeeDee Lamb, I think that's going to be a really good discussion as a stock down player. And then I know you want to touch on Kadarius Toney's limited stats being kind of this year's Brandon Ayuk. But AJ Brown is a guy I've had just a massive crush on for a long time, just ever since his rookie year, and he just exploded. And he's been one of the most efficient wide receivers in the league. He's been absolutely dominant, and we just haven't seen him get the volume. On Sunday, we saw him get 13 targets, and basically just everything in the Philly passing game went to AJ Brown. And, Devontae Smith and Goddard are good players, and AJ Brown had 5 more targets than both of those combined. If this is the type of usage we see with AJ Brown, maybe not 13 targets every week, but 10, 12, 9, 11, like, we are going to see a top 3 fantasy wide receiver season out of him because he's that good. And it's only been about usage, and people worried about the Philly passing it, or Philly offense maybe being more run heavy, not necessarily passing a lot. Even if they don't pass, they're a league average passing team. As long as everything's going to AJ Brown at like a Devontae Adams like level, I think he's good enough to be a top 3 wide receiver. And then I know you've been more reticent about Michael Pittman. I've always been a pretty big fan. I think he showed he's a true alpha. He was the guy in the Indy passing game. I don't know if you have any comments there. Are you not buying in yet, or are you changing your mind a little bit?
No, listen, I think Michael Pittman's a good player, and I think he's gonna be their lead guy and put up a really good statistical season. I I felt like the hype for Michael Pittman was approaching like a Mike Evans level, and I'm more of like Vincent Jackson, like good player, good wide receiver too. I don't think we're gonna see even this year where he's gonna get heavy volume. I'm not sure we're gonna see like a top 10 season. Maybe the volume's there enough. But like you talk about AJ Brown, like to me, there's a talent disparity between a guy like Michael Pittman and AJ Brown.
Oh, definitely.
Just for an
AJ
like
Brown is a top 3 wide receiver for
yeah,
me.
like
I think Pittman's about a top 12, 15.
like I watch AJ Brown and it just drives me crazy that a team traded him before his rookie contract was even up. This is the dream scenario. You draft the guy in round 2 and this is what he becomes, and you don't even keep him for his second contract. You don't even let him play out his rookie contract and a franchise tag. Nothing. And it's like, this is what you want. Like, you're a win now team. You were the 1 seed in the AFC last year. It was a confounding move that we came on air and talked about the night of opening round of the draft. It's still a mind-boggling decision by Tennessee. Philly reaped the benefits. They were on the odd man out for round 1 wide receiver because they were all gone except Treylon Burks if they wanted him. And they turned their draft pick, into AJ Brown, who I feel pretty confident saying none of these round 1 rookie wide receivers end up being nearly as good as what AJ Brown could bring to the table. And they got him at whatever that pick was, 17 or 18. Obviously they had to pay him, and I understand that. But he's a special player. With him being way, way up, and I agree with you, I am not sure, though, in the way they play, it leaves enough meat on the bone for Devonta Smith more than a low-end wide receiver reflex. So I do think he's hurt by A.J. Brown's ascension into what we think is going to be a clear top 5, top 7 type season, maybe even our top 3. But with Jefferson and Kupp and Chase, that it might.
He was right there with him, though.
He was right there this week. I just can he
I don't know that we're going to see
craziness.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to see it concentrated at this level. This was like a Devontae Adams like dominated target concentration level. So I don't know. I think Smith is too good. Goddard is too good. I do think that's going to even out a little bit. It's not 13 targets every week. There's going to be a week or two where Smith does out target him. But, I do think they didn't trade for him. They didn't pay him to not use him. And that's what they showed week 1. And so, yeah, I just finally feel justified that my belief in his talent, even amidst all of the swirling situation of doubt amongst the Philly offense, going to use him or not. Finally, unwavering faith is paying off.
Yeah, it's gonna, because he was a guy, anyone who's been a long time listener, he was my wide receiver 1 that year, and nobody had that. That was the N'Keal Harry year, the DK Metcalf, and I loved AJ Brown. And listen, AJ Brown, the only thing that's held AJ Brown back ever has been injuries. If he stays on the football field, he's just a beast. He's an absolute beast. And you hope that injuries don't derail him. He's better than Hakeem Nicks ever was, but Hakeem Nicks was a really good player who I watched very closely in New York that had injuries derail him, right? They just kept adding up. And then once, and then it just warped him of what he could be. AJ Brown is obviously not there yet, but that's really the only thing that can stop AJ Brown. He's a physical freak when he's on the football field, and he's going to be a really, really tough player in that Philly offense, which is more diversified than even the Tennessee offense.
Let's take let's take our stock down, players to round us out. And okay, so I know Kadarius Toney. You tweeted out it's criminal usage to give him 7 snaps, and on the 2 touches he's given, he's looking like the most electric player on the field. I think this is just a matter of time. I called him you kind of called him, when we were going to talk about him, the Brandon Ayuk of this year. And, that's eventually Ayuk emerged out, and, was used pretty well last year for San Francisco. I don't think we're going to see Tony be on the shelf for too long. If they have any hopes for this season for anything, they're going to use him.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll leave that up to you. I don't. It's a stock down, but I think it's a temporary one. It's not one that I'm going to bury him. I actually think that's one that I'm feeling okay about buying.
Yeah, like listen, and a stock down just from the general right now. Like I was ready. I was all in this year thinking he was going to have this monster year, and I would still buy him right now because I believe in the talent. But this is 2 regimes now that he's had some issues with, right? It's just been last year for a while. They would only use him on these bit packages. Then eventually they had a lot of injuries and he was kind of forced into action, looked great. And then injuries derailed that. And now this year there's always something. And they claim he was healthy yesterday, but they didn't let him run a route. He ran no routes, not one single route. They only used him on run plays, motion, and they handed it off, or he ran 0 routes, no targets, 0 routes run, 7 snaps, the whole game. I don't know. It was an injury. Because you saw on the play that he did make, it's not an injury. He was making people miss. If they were going to say, oh, we want to kind of bump up his usage because he didn't play in the preseason, I feel like that would have been viable if it was like 20 snaps, 25 snaps, 0 routes run and 7 snaps, even after Wendell Robinson left the game after the first drive.
The only thing that makes sense in my mind is that it's a grasp of the offense and
100%.
assignment sound, maybe. But if that's the problem, they're going to work. If they're at all good coaches, they're going to work to close that gap with him because they need him on the field and they need him to be able to grasp that and they need him out there making plays. So if that's the gap right now, like they're going to work to get that closed.
I hope so. My only fear is around the draft time. There was all those trade rumors.
Yeah.
Like, is he again? We don't have proof.
We don't know.
Is there something? Is his character so bad or his work ethic so bad that it's just like almost like toxic to utilize him? I don't want to believe it's that because I love the player. And
we can't know. It just
we don't
speculation.
Know. It's
really
speculation. But what we saw from Saquon, if they ever incorporated Tony into that offense, I mean, listen, New York fans are excited here. Their next 3 games are at home against Carolina, a Dakless Cowboys, and a Chicago Bears team. Like Giants fans are dreaming about 4-0. Like we need to get more playmakers though. Saquon can't go otherworldly for 200 yards a game. That's just not practical.
I'd be okay with it though.
Yeah, me too. So listen, I think there's a buying window on Kadarius Toney,
but it's risky.
But it's very risky because this isn't like, oh, the Brandon Ayuk thing was like came out of nowhere, blip on the radar. We didn't hear anything leading up to it. We've been hearing about issues with Kadarius Toney from pre-draft to his first rookie minicamp to his rookie season, his sophomore preseason. It's been continuous. So that's the one thing where I think we were both under the belief Brandon Ayuk was eventually going to rise back to who we thought. Mm-hmm. Tony, it's been 2 years worth, almost a year and a half worth of always something. Injuries. Worried about him interested in rap. So I do think there's more risk as much as I do love the player and want to see him out there. And if he's healthy, I think you got to use him for everybody's benefit. But maybe he doesn't know the playbook.
Yeah. Look, I know we're running long, but I can't escape this podcast here without talking a little bit about CeeDee Lamb because I look into it this year and I look at the depth chart. I look at Dallas. I look at what looks like they're trying to do. And I there's no way I don't see CeeDee Lamb as one of the 5 or 10 targeted players in the league. And 11 targets is not bad. He had 2 catches. And he's got a buying window now too, probably, but you're still buying at, if you are at that price that he was at, that maybe top 3, 4, 5 dynasty wide receiver. And I don't know if CeeDee Lamb is that guy. I don't know if he's that top 4, top 5 dynasty wide receiver. I What are your thoughts there? Like, are you taking this opportunity? Are you paying top 5 prices but getting him on your squad because you think he's going to make it there? Because that's the only time you can get players like this. If they're hurt, or there's just something about their usage that is slightly off, and like AJ Brown, right? They come back because of the talent. What do you think he's that talent?
I think he's got the talent to be a high level player, but I'd be reluctant to go and pay the price. I don't feel as safe with him as I do some of the other receivers in that neighborhood of dynasty rankings for a variety of reasons. I was very down on Dallas this year. I'm very concerned about their team
Yeah.
now with the Dak injury, even more so. I also do envision, I know they signed Gallup to big money, but I could also see Dallas very much investing in a receiver very high in the draft again, sooner rather than later. I feel like that's something Jerry Jones would do. They have offensive line problems.
Mhm.
They refuse to move on and minimize the work of Ezekiel Elliott. There's a lot of issues there with them. And the thing about CeeDee Lamb is he hasn't proved, and not that this is a death nail, but he hasn't proved that he can be a dominating player at the next level without being
Mhm.
in the slot. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
He's been, and he had a guy that drew the attention away from him more in Amari
Mhm.
Cooper, that we haven't seen him be the lead guy yet. We just kind of naturally assumed he could be. Like, we saw AJ Brown do it and do it fast in Tennessee. We saw DK Metcalf do it, and Tyler Lockett was a great, sidekick. But we saw DK Metcalf do it quickly in Seattle. We haven't
CeeDee Lamb
seen.
was, yeah, he's been a wide receiver 2 for fantasy talent. He's flashed some big flash
That's what
plays,
I'm saying. Like,
but
we kind of pushed him to that top of the pecking order, but he hadn't really ever shown us that he can get there yet. It was all projection.
and now we
And
have 2 months without Dak, and you're gonna what? Play Cooper Rush, Jimmy
yeah,
Garoppolo? Like, uh, it's probably gonna be the Zeke show, right? Because you're not gonna drop back and pass. I don't know. I think CeeDee Lamb is a phenomenal player. I really do. But I think I have to bump him down a tier, because I think we did crown him. There were plenty of places he was ranked above, probably drafted before AJ Brown, all offseason. People already kind of prematurely putting him up there. And you're right. We haven't seen that, and we're in year 3 now.
yeah, I
So
mean,
in my mind, he has to be with those other. I mean, he has to be a guy like Deontay Johnson or Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, kind of. I mean, that could still be in a range, T. Higgins, right? It could still be in that
yeah,
range, 10, 15, 12. Michael Pittman even. I think he could, if you're telling me that he have a better career than Michael Pittman, I would totally believe that. Even if I was very excited about Pittman and a stock up on Pittman. Who would you rather have, Pittman or CeeDee Lamb?
I do think the ceiling is higher on CD Lamb still. So I'd probably still go with CD Lamb, but I think Pittman is going to be. You're going to know what you're getting with Michael Pittman.
You're going
I
to get a
still think
better year with Pittman this year.
you're definitely getting a better year this year with Pittman. I
And
don't even think that's debatable anymore.
so yeah, so in December, so you probably should take Pittman now, get the production, and in December you could pick Lamb back up, with a little extra something
I think the
after.
dynasty community was ready to anoint CD Lamb like right below like Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr
Yeah,
Chase.
he was right there. He was.
That's
He was
I
going
I
there.
think people felt like that's where he was, but he really didn't do anything to warrant that. Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase they showed in their rookie years why they deserve to be there. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that from CeeDee Lamb.
And that's a really good point. It's sort of a retrospective that we have to take, and that sort of that breakout age kind of thing from the NFL perspective really does have to play a role. We're still elevating him off his prospect profile, draft capital, landing spot.
And there wasn't, and the thing about CeeDee Lamb is he fell to like what, 21, and there wasn't any.
I think
there
somewhere
wasn't
in
any,
there
there
behind
wasn't any.
Burks.
Yeah, but didn't. Oh yeah, they a team traded. I'm forgetting where Rager went in relation to him. Did he go before Rager?
I think he went before Rager and Jefferson, but take a look.
Okay, maybe he did. But it's like he wasn't a top 10 talent. He wasn't a top 5 talent. So like he didn't have the pedigree of Ja'Marr Chase. He didn't have that level of pedigree. So we put him up there, but why was he there? Why was he that high? Why was he ahead of a guy like Jalen Waddle, who in his first year caught 105 passes and didn't even utilize his best skill set because his quarterback can't throw the deep ball? He was pushed up a little quickly. And now,
you'll have a laugh on this one. CeeDee Lamb went behind in the NFL draft, Henry Ruggs at 12 and Jerry Jeudy at 15.
And then he went
and ahead of Jalen Rager at 21. Yeah, 17.
17. Okay. So he was 17. Yeah. So,
just another player who hasn't really done it. I haven't watched the game yet, but Jerry Jeudy, right? He hasn't shown it yet either. And I think the talent is there. I really do. Like you said, the ceiling is there for a player like CeeDee Lamb.
And guys can be great players out of the slot, but usually that comes with another guy drawing attention on the outside. Like as great as Cooper Kupp is, the Rams have always had other really good guys to play alongside him. He's elevated to be the best of the bunch by far, and he's uncoverable. We got to see if CeeDee Lamb now without Amari Cooper could be that guy, that alpha.
Maybe all he needs is Michael Gallup to come back, because Gallup is a very good outside wide receiver. I don't know. So it sounds like you're not buying at top 5. I'm not either. So it is a real true stock down situation, I think. And I'd be a little bit more patient if I knew Dak was going to be playing the next couple months. But I just think the path for him to rebound and help rebuild his stock when Cooper Rush is throwing him the ball it's like threading a needle. I just don't know. It scares me a little bit. And like, for example, could you pivot off of CeeDee Lamb for AJ Brown? I don't know if you could do that anymore, but earlier in the offseason, earlier this summer, that's something that 10 times out of 10 would get it done. So maybe that's something to try.
I mean, if you think about it, this year is not going to go well for CeeDee Lamb. He's going to be entering his 4th year next year, and he's not going to have any elite seasons under his belt. Yet he's being valued as an elite level asset. Like, that's rare. 4th season in the league, he's not going to have one elite season on his record, but he's being valued as an elite asset. And I don't think the Dallas offense is going to flip a switch back to be some great offense. Now, listen, maybe the word is maybe Sean Payton gets there and they have a great offense next year and a much better scheme. Who knows? But 3 seasons under his belt, he's not going to have an elite season under any of those 3, yet he's being valued as an elite level dynasty asset. I think he's got to come down a little bit. I got to get to my rankings already after 1 week. I feel like I got to get into my rankings and start making adjustments already based on late in the preseason, based on now week 1 of the NFL season. I do feel like there's a lot to change. So, Jeff, any final parting thoughts before we get out of here?
No, why don't we wrap it up for the night?
So, guys, if you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, ssfootball.com. Check out our premium content tab. Get the notebooks now, maximize them for the entire NFL and college football season, and we'll take you right through the draft and post-draft next year as well. So, on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.